is a sermon for February 27th, 2022, and that's my cockatiel baby who's chiming in, wants to be part of the sermon. All right, I'm going to begin reading from Luke 6:27 through 38. To you who are ready for the truth, I say this: love your enemies. Let them bring out the best in you, not the worst. When someone gives you a hard time, respond with the supple moves of prayer for that person. If someone grabs your shirt, gift wrap your best coat and make a present of it. If someone takes unfair advantage of you, use the occasion to practice the servant life. No more payback. Live generously. Here is a simple rule of thumb for behavior. Ask yourself what you want people to do for you. Then grab the initiative and do it for them. If you only love the lovable, do you expect a pat on the back? Run-of-the-mill sinners do that. If you only help those who help you, do you expect a medal? Garden variety sinners do that. If you only give for what you hope to get out of it, do you think that's charity? The stingiest of pawnbrokers does that. I tell you, love your enemies. Help and give without expecting a return. You'll never, I promise, you'll never regret it. Live out this God-created identity the way our Father lives toward us, generously and graciously, even when we're at our worst. Our Father is kind. You be kind. Don't pick on people, jump on their failures, criticize their faults, unless, of course, you want the same treatment. Don't condemn those who are down. That hardness can boomerang. Be easy on people. You'll find life a lot easier. Give away your life. You'll find life given back, but not merely given back with bonus and blessing. Giving, not getting, is the way. Generosity begets generosity. All right, before I dive into this scripture, which is Luke 6:27 through 38, if you want to look it up, before I dive into it, I want to say something about my tears last Sunday. I was caught by surprise by some very difficult meanness from people that I least expected it from, and it was painful, very, very painful. And it was very fresh, and I didn't have time to process what was going on. And so thank you all for being understanding. But I came across this quote that I wanted to share with you. Vulnerability, this is from Brene Brown. Vulnerability at its heart is the willingness to show up and be seen when you can't control perception. The one thing that we all have in common is the paradox of vulnerability. That when I meet you, the very first thing I look for in you is vulnerability. And the very last thing I want to show you is my vulnerability. So thank you for all being so understanding. I did not want to show my vulnerability in that way, and unfortunately, I just didn't have any choice. So I hope things are better. I have been counseled to stay with things and give it time, and so that's what I'm working on. All right, so Mondays, noon each week, I'm part of a group called The Circle, and I'm learning about storytelling, the power of storytelling for transformation. And there's quite a few ministers involved in the group, quite a few Methodists too, because we want to understand more about the telling of stories with power. And 2 weeks ago, we listened and talked with a woman named Jo Berry. Her name is J-O. Berry, Jo Berry. You can look her up on TED Talks. Her father was killed by an IRA bomb set off by a man named Patrick McGee. When Jo's father was killed, she made up her mind that she didn't want to have an enemy. And she was going to try to understand why IRA members are involved in violence. So that was her decision way back. I think it's been 35 years since then. She eventually did a lot of healing work, grief work, just for herself. She ended up going to a retreat center where victims of violence, family members of victims of violence, came together to talk about their grief, their difficulties. And so she had a lot of raw, strong emotions, and she worked through it as much as she could in that retreat center. She wanted to heal together with other people. It's not the kind of healing that you want to take on by yourself. When we endure difficulties, we don't want to be alone. She couldn't think about anything else until she expressed her grief and worked through it with a group. And like I said, you don't want to do that alone. And there were many other steps that she did before she was able to hear Patrick McGee talk about his work in the IRA, his violence in the IRA. So there were many steps she went through before she agreed to meet with him at a house. She had extended the invitation. He could never do that first. And so she had extended the invitation. She had a friend, a colleague, who arranged the meeting. And at first, Patrick was very surprised at the interest that Joe Barry took in understanding his involvement in the violence. And at first, he used phrases like legitimate target, speaking of the hotel. Of course, he didn't set out to kill Joe's father, but they were justifying what they did in the IRA. And then Joe felt like she had heard enough and was going to end the meeting. And then Patrick said, after a time of silence, he said, "I'm so sorry I killed your father." And then they talked for 2 more hours, for 3 hours altogether. Patrick could see what an amazing person Joe was. She had such compassion. She had curiosity. She recognized Patrick's humanity, which he did not expect at all. And I think Patrick decided that if Joe was an amazing person, then her father must also have been an amazing person to raise Joe in this way. And Patrick was far more complicated as a person than a two-dimensional bomber, which is, Joe Barry didn't think he was, but a lot of people think that's what it comes down to. They ended up talking at length many, many times, and they ended up speaking at peace and reconciliation events, more than 400 events before COVID took over and a lot of the in-person speaking engagements were canceled. But there are a lot of steps involved in this. You don't just get two enemies together and just say, sit down, talk. It's not like that. There's a lot of work that has to be done. I don't have time to get into all of it. We spent an hour with Joe Barry and listened to her story. And like I said, you can look her up on TED Talks. But I just want to give you a glimpse of the kind of work that she did. Just a snapshot. So when Jesus said, "Love your enemy," he did not mean become a doormat for others to abuse you. We are each the beloved of God. As I've told you before, we do not deserve any abuse nor any violence. And when Jesus said, if someone takes your shirt, gift wrap your finest coat and hand it over to them as well. Well, Jesus was talking about a court arrangement where the rich could take the shirt of a poor person, which is pretty ridiculous. Like, how much could you really sell a shirt for? And is it just mean punishment or what? But in court, if someone has taken your shirt and you hand them your coat and you're poor, that's all you've got. That means you're standing in a public court in your underwear or in your undergarments. It might have been something like a sleep shirt. And so it shows the shame on the rich. It reverses the power structure, not permanently, but for a moment it does. And so Jesus is talking about changing things in a way that it's hard for us to understand. But we even understand how you can change old patterns when you assume that they will always be the way they've been. So I hope that even in the courtroom, they could laugh at the ridiculous nature of the old order, where the rich would take the last items that the poor had in order to try to get their money back. So holding a grudge, and this is a kind of a common saying, but holding a grudge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And resentments are like that. Plus, the person on top of the power structure, we'll say the dominant person, is out dancing, while the poor person who's swallowing the poison hoping the rich person will die, the rich people are out dancing, and so they don't care what they've done. I mean, in the traditional way of viewing the power structure. And so we can be like that too when we are thinking again and again and again about how someone has wronged us. Is the person that wronged us really thinking about it? I don't think so. They've done some studies and they've asked people, and no, they don't even remember having hurt that person who's then thought about it for years and years, decades maybe. So Jo Barry could have held on to anger at her father's death, and she would have been right to do so in the traditional view of things. But she wanted something more than that. Any old person could hold on to anger and resentment. And Patrick was going to follow the old script too until Jo Barry came along and disrupted it. Patrick was going to hold on to the rightness of his argument that the IRA had to bomb the hotel in order to get their point across. And so both of them, it ended up, Jo Barry and Patrick McGee, they both wanted something different. Neither one of them were going to hold on to anger and resentment. It took more than 20 years for them to untangle the threads of the anger, so it's not a quick or easy process. And Jo was asked, "What does forgiveness mean to you?" And she answered, "Giving up revenge." So what a different world we would live in if there was a process that everyone knew about for giving up the right to revenge. Jesus said, "Do to others what you would have them do to you." That is a tall order. Do to others what you would have them do to you. So if you want kindness, you grab the initiative and do kindness for the person that was your enemy. What a different world. What a different world. In our country, we are so busy demonizing those that we name as the enemy. It's become rampant. And is this what Jesus recommends, that we should demonize the other, whoever that is? What if we were to take small steps, very small baby steps, and we check in with the former enemy to see their humanity each step of the way? Would they then be willing to show respect for the other person, even the very beginning of respect and curiosity? So Jo Barry started this with Patrick McGee, but then Patrick engaged with respect and curiosity. And so the very beginning of trust was built. Maybe one step, they recognized the humanity of the other person. Are we human, especially with those that we struggle with, maybe a considered enemy? How do we have choices in how we deal with hatred or how we deal with resentment or anger? Jo Barry was able to leave the table at any time, and there were times that she had to leave and take care of her own hurt and then come back to the table, but she stayed with it. She didn't leave and stay away. That is powerful. She had respect for the other person's story, as hard as that was. And she couldn't do that until she had found healing from her own deep grief. She had done her work. So in their process of building tiny pieces of trust, respect, and curiosity, there were times that Jo had to withdraw in order to care for herself, but the withdrawal was not final. She was willing to go back into the mess of feelings and work, and so was he. They were both willing to see the humanity in the other person, the humanity worthy of respect, and that's huge. Another factor is that Jo Barry wanted restorative justice. She wanted justice, and that could have meant him staying in prison for life. Instead, he was released as part of the Good Friday Agreement, and peace was hammered out in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and Patrick was released from prison as part of that. And so Patrick has to do his own work. He has to live with himself the rest of his life after having killed Jo's father. And so that's a cost too. And she considered that justice, but restorative justice. They each committed to the other to stay in the conversations until something new was created. They both had to be honest about the pain, the anger, the injustice, the end of demonizing, the respect, the mutual humanity, and they had to have a curiosity about the other person. This is key. Peace isn't a place, it's a process, which is ongoing. It takes courage, conversations, and story. Amen.